Hello YouTube, time for a mailbag video. I've been busy all summer, my mail's been piling up, and it's finally time to get around to dealing with all of it. So I've got a bunch of parts for all my projects this fall and winter season, and time to go through it all. I've got a pile of these 8-channel relay boards. They're nice and simple to use. They're opto-isolated. You just pull down on one of these input pins after supplying it power. You close the relay and you're all good. Surprisingly enough, this actually has isolation slots milled into the board. So when they say it's for a certain rated voltage, I'm more inclined to believe that for, $5 or so I can actually get 120 volts off of this. But, your mileage may vary. I've got a whole bunch of cables here for dealing with putting microcontrollers into robust enclosures. So I've got Cat5 to a panel mount or bulkhead mount connector. So I can plug this into, say, a Raspberry Pi or a BeagleBone or Arduino Ethernet, and I don't have to worry about breaking the Ethernet jack off of the expensive board or butting the board up right against the side of the enclosure. I have a couple inches of play and a couple M3 molded nuts in here, so I can just bolt this into a panel. Easy peasy. Same with HDMI for Raspberry Pi. Just panel mount and plug this in. USB micro to USB-A female. So this would be good for putting on the panel of a project so you can connect your laptop to program it, but plug the USB micro internally into an ESP8266 or a Raspberry Pi and be able to communicate without, again, risking breaking off that connector during programming or maintenance. And similarly, USB-A to USB-A male to female, so you can plug this side into a Raspberry Pi or a USB host device like an Arduino Yun and put the port on the outside of your project with no risk to your project itself. I've got a whole pile of these PCF 8574 I2C I/O expanders. They're just breakout boards, and you can set the address with 3 jumpers. There's an Arduino library out there. It's pretty simple to use. A whole pile of temperature sensors. Where did they go? A whole pile of temperature sensors. I've got an SHT-3X style, as well as a whole pile of much cheaper and lower accuracy LM75 style temperature sensors. I've got an ADS analog devices 1115 I2C multiple input analog to digital converter. So I think I get 4 analog inputs out of this, and you're able to get, well, without using a whole bunch of analog input pins. So if you need more, you're golden. A UFL to SMA normal polarity 2.4 gigahertz wireless antenna, because one of the projects I'm going to use an ESP8266 with a UFL connector on it, and I want to be able to extend the range outside with a longer distance antenna on it. Whole pile of breadboard and prototyping cables, male pin to female header, because you can never have enough of those. One of these newfangled Nextion resistive touchscreen display modules where you pop in a USB, not a USB, an SD, a micro SD card with your graphics and your UI all programmed in here from the software from this Nextion company, and you just send serial commands to poll for events on the touchscreen or attach interrupts when this sends out bytes on certain events. So this takes a lot of the overhead with running a graphical display or touchscreen away from a microcontroller like an ESP8266 or an Arduino. And they're getting relatively cheap these days too. I've got a whole bunch of PL9826 LEDs, which are basically WS2812 LEDs in a T5 package. So you've got ground, 5 volt, and data in, data out. So you can address these individually. Now, it seems a little bit weird to have 5mm LEDs, but my purpose for this is to use them as bezel or panel mount with a bezel for indicator LEDs. So instead of using 5 LEDs and a whole bunch of discrete GPIO pins, I can use one pin and address any number of LEDs for the display, because the update rate has to be relatively low. Plus, you can get 256 RGB colors instead of having to deal with, bicolor LED drivers and all sorts of nonsense. So I've also got some nice metal LED mounts as well. A whole bunch of Scotchlok connectors from China. You can never have enough of these. These are insulation displacement connectors. They've got some dielectric grease inside. You insert your wires and you use a special tool to crimp this down, and it forms a very reliable connection that I found. So I've got a couple different sizes that'll serve me for a while. What else? I've got a whole pile of electromagnets here. I'm trying to remember. I think these are 40 kilogram lifting force. It's a bit of an oddball project that I have in mind, but I want to turn these into what are known as electropermanent magnets. The idea being that there is a permanent magnet embedded in here, and by using the electromagnet to counteract the permanent magnet, I can turn off the magnetism using an electrical current instead of having to constantly energize the magnet. So that's going to be a machining project unto its own. Other than that, a giant pile of USB micro cables, because you can never have enough of those for ESPs and Raspberry Pis, and a mailbag from a friend. I got a Canadian Forces, which is our military up here in Canada, an IMP, or individual meal packet. This is Tarragon chicken, and I'm going to try and eat this and see how it's packaged, but this is the real deal. My friend gave this to me as a gift. You're not really able to buy these, so this is going to be interesting to tear into and tear down. Chow down video? I don't know. I'm out of jokes there. As well, I've got this decibel meter, which I plan to turn into a decibel meter that's hooked up to an ESP8266, so I can monitor the noise levels in an area, because there's a nice little PWM output, and the more recent implementations of the Arduino bootloader for the Raspberry Pi, not the Raspberry Pi, the ESP8266 finally supports the pulse in command, so it's relatively trivial to monitor this and extrapolate the decibel value based on the datasheet. So that's another project that really just needs to be packaged up. Am I missing anything? Not particularly. Oh wait, no I am. I've also got a whole pile of these rotary encoder boards that, interestingly enough, come from the factory still attached and V-grooved to each other. These are rotary encoders with a push-click. Useful for prototyping. They're like $1 a piece, so why not buy a bunch and just have these on hand to prototype with for different projects. So that's my mailbag for 2016, I think. There's more coming, and it's not all here, but there's going to be a whole bunch of projects coming up. Stay tuned.